On today's Sounding Off, we have Greg Wells. Greg is a multiple Grammy-nominated record producer, songwriter, musician, and mix engineer in Los Angeles. His songs have appeared on more than 85 million albums. His credits include Katy Perry, Keith Urban, 21 Pilots, Adele, Pharrell Williams, Timbaland, OneRepublic, Deftones, Pink, and the list goes on. That's next on Sounding Off. Nice to see you, Greg.
Hi.
I watched your introduction from your website, and I knew I knew a lot about you from, just being a connoisseur of production and songwriting. When you start out your video, you're improvising, and it's very, very hip, modern, I would say modern classical music, and you're obviously improvising, I would say. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
And then I found out you studied with Claire Fisher for a short time at least. And you have a very sophisticated harmonic sense that is well beyond what you would find a typical producer that produces the kind of music that you do with huge hits and radio singles and things like that. How does that influence what you do as a writer and a producer?
Well, I remember the very first orchestral arrangement I ever did was on the first record I ever produced, which was for a Canadian band called the Crash Test Dummies.
Yep.
And I did not do their one big hit, which we've all heard a lot, which I love.
Yeah.
I was a couple of records later. We did this quirky, I'm so proud of the album. It's really interesting. It's called Give Yourself a Hand. And it still really holds up. At least I think it does. Clearly I'm biased, but there was this one orchestral, kind of Tom Waitsy orchestral arrangement, sort of twisted and dark, and I was really proud of it. And this was back in the day when there were cassette players in most cars. And I made a cassette tape of the rough mix from the studio where we were working. And I kept listening to it. I kept rewinding, listening to it, thinking this is really fun. I'm getting away with some harmonic stuff here and kind of pushing the envelope. And I'm starting to get a little, drinking my own Kool-Aid a little bit. Because it's just the thrill of, when you're kind of newer in the studio, hearing anything you've done, even if it's a bad take, hearing it back through any kind of speakers is just indescribable. Now I guess with everybody can buy Logic in their laptop for $200, so it's less of a phenomenon now to hear yourself recorded back. But back in the day when there were no laptops, laptop studios, it was really like an incredible, like, oh my God, I got let into the celestial city somehow, So I'm listening to it. I probably listened to it like 6 or 7 times, and then I parked in front of the house I was renting, and I wanted to bring the cassette tape in with me, so I hit eject. And when I listen to music, I'm not listening to pop music. I don't listen to the kind of stuff that I get hired to work on because I want to stay fresh for that. And I get more inspiration out of modern classical music, which you already picked up on, and jazz and world music and just anything that sounds different than the kind of stuff I work on. So it was parked on the classical station in Los Angeles. At the time, there were 2 classical stations. Now we're down to 1 in LA. But one would always play a lot of very forward-leaning stuff. It's how I discovered Goretzky and a bunch of other stuff. And I could not believe what I was hearing when I ejected the cassette. It was indescribable. And I just sat dumbfounded in the car. And then it was over, and I went in and I called the radio station. I said, "Could you please tell me what you were playing?" And it was Toru Takemitsu, who is an unbelievable Japanese composer who died, I think, maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little less than 10 years ago. He did a lot of film scores. He did most of Akira Kurosawa's movies.
Yes, exactly.
And it was this one piece called Orion and Pleiades, I think it was called. It was one movement from this, and it featured this cellist, and he was playing quarter tones, and the color, and I immediately went out and bought the CD, and I still listen to it and just think, whatever planet I'm able to get to in my lifetime of crazy, interesting harmony. Like that guy was born 10 galaxies past that planet, and then just I don't know how he does what he does. It's very, Frank Zappa would say that harmony is really in its infancy, and the Western musical ear is used to just 12 steps of a scale, but a lot of the planet doesn't divide the scale that way.
Right.
And so I'm always trying to answer your questions in a very, very, very roundabout way. Although for me, this is a succinct and direct answer. I'm always looking to kind of sneak in something for the musicians in the crowd who are going to pick it up, because I am one of them. And, whenever those moments happen on radio or whatever, I think all of us are like, thank you, like whoever does it, wherever
Sure.
it comes from. There's such a, especially today, because everyone is creating on the same gear. They're all using the same sounds. Pop radio today, with the rarest of exceptions, kind of all sounds like the exact same producer, the exact same mix, the exact same sound palette, the exact same 10 words. It's really conservative, actually. It's bizarrely conservative. And I grew up, and you grew up in a time where music had more danger to it, and it was popular music. It wasn't weird, marginalized indie music. It was really interesting. And in Canada, where I'm from, and I was a teenager in the 80s, like, there were sophisticated chords in
Sure.
a lot of pop songs, even simple pop songs. They would take a lot of harmonic chances, and anytime I would hear that, it would catch my ear. And that is why I completely lost my mind when I saw you and your son for the first time on YouTube doing those absolutely bananas ear training exercises. I don't know how he's able to pick that stuff out. You've created a monster. It's really fascinating. It's so inspiring. I and all my friends talk about it all the time.
Well, I only played him really modern classical music and jazz and Bach. That was it. But I'm absolutely fascinated when I hear, your whole concept here, that you have this incredible background.
I have a sort of ridiculous amount of training in my background. I'm from a very small town in rural Canada, and my only access point to any kind of music was to take piano lessons. And thankfully, my parents supported that. They never bought me an instrument. I mean, I was initially a drummer, and I never had drums. I finally had to, through playing church organ and just random fashion shows in the downtown shopping center, saved enough money to buy a really bad used drum set, which I loved. But it's all been very sort of exotic and very distant for me, and I feel like I want to bring up 10 different subjects at the same time.
Please do.
I just remember sitting at we had an upright piano. We had a used upright piano that my mom had got a couple years before I was born. And, just starting to discover harmony and starting to discover interesting, more clustery, darker harmony. And I really loved it. I didn't know what was going on, but I just thought this was really cool. And I wasn't hearing those sounds. My parents liked to listen to light show tunes,
okay,
and church music. My dad was a minister in the church, so they would listen to volume 1 and then talk over it. So that's how music rolled out of my house.
Okay.
They weren't fans of music of their generation. If anything, they liked music from 2 or 3 generations before them. And so no drums, nothing funky, no kind of, there was no Beatles. I didn't grow up with the Beatles or tons of different bands because of that. And I think maybe actually that's given me some kind of more unique approach to all of this. I mean, I can't tell. I've had people say that to me. My stuff will never really sound like the Beatles just because it wasn't there. I've discovered them as an adult, and I know that sounds really funny to every musician I meet. When I was in Los Angeles in the 90s, after studying with Claire Fisher for about a year and a half, I slowly became a studio musician, a session musician on piano and then drums and sometimes guitar and bass and sometimes all of it or half of it. people would make all these Beatle references, and they would say, I want this to feel more Revolver. And I would have to say in front of everybody, sometimes in front of people like Lee Sklar on bass, you know, or like, I don't know what that means because I didn't grow up with it. And it was never funny. And it wasn't funny for me either, but like some people actually took offense to it, you know, but I don't know. I can't go back in time. So anyway, the darker harmony stuff and just improvising a lot always really spoke to me. And I played a lot of Bach as a kid too. That's how I started on piano, was improvising and Bach, and a little bit of boogie-woogie in there as well. The amazing woman I was studying with, Marjorie Engels, she, I think, recognized that I was a frustrated drummer. So half the lesson was kind of boogie-woogie and a little Thelonious Monk, and just exposure to a little more, you know, not complicated rhythmic jazz, like a little simpler, like, you know, 1-4-5, like boogie-woogie is.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And then the second half would be mostly Bach with like a little bit of other stuff in there. And it got me hooked. Yeah, here's to the crazy harmony. And then studying with Claire Fisher was like putting my head into some sort of parallel universe blender microwave. It was just, he lives in a place where people like Toru Takemitsu and Henry Gorecki live too. You know, the exercises he would give me would always start out kind of simple, and then it would get like, oh, this is hard, but I can manage it. And then it would just, the wheels would just fall off the car. And he wanted that to happen. He wanted to see how long I could kind of stretch until my shoulders popped out of their sockets. And I think he could just kind of go and follow those patterns forever. Super inspiring. I got to stop this answer. I'll just keep talking forever.
No, okay. So did your parents, when you started playing and you were taking lessons, did they encourage you? Did they ever have to say, Greg, hey, you need to practice your piano, or was everything self-driven?
Music was self-driven. Practicing classical piano was not self-driven. There was definitely a lot of yelling to get me to practice.
Thank God.
And I got to say, I thanked my mom many times. I'm like, thank you for screaming at me. Because it's given me a career that I wouldn't otherwise have.
Right.
I mean, I would still be in music somehow, and I'd still be probably a pretty proficient piano player. But, you get to a point with classical music, classical piano, where if you don't practice at least a couple hours a day, you just can't play the stuff.
Right.
You can't. You have to get it into your muscle memory. You have to get it into all memory. And then you have to feel it, and it's like rehearsing a complicated theater piece as an actor. You can't phone that stuff in. So, I was competing, and not doing this in a vacuum. It was very like, you enter the music festival, and and then I got into it, and then I actually got to the point where it kind of was my idea to practice, but that came later. That was like in my young teens.
Since there wasn't really recording equipment available when you were growing up in the way that there is now, when did your fascination with recording begin, and actual and really more of the sound part of it as a producer? I know you mix a lot of things that you produce and that you write. When you write with people, you're really hands-on, playing, writing, producing, mixing. Why all those different things?
I always had a fascination with great sound, and I think the reason is because there was no great sound in my life. Like, we had a terrible sounding stereo. Everything just sounded like shit sonically, it did. Like, I used to, like, in my dad's church, they had a Shure 57 microphone. They had two. There were two pulpits, and they had one in each pulpit. But like, the little PA system that the church could afford just sounded terrible. It sounded like, more like a megaphone really than like a nice sound. Like the microphone in this iPhone that I'm talking to you on is way more hi-fi and probably sounds much better than the experience of. Actually, I love 57s, but I didn't like what they were plugged into. It just was awful. But I love that the sort of exoticism of music done professionally was really heavy for me. I was obsessed. And I remember I would, like, after church, I would turn the mic on and go talk into it and try to listen to it. I'd have my friends talking to it, and I'd try to set a good level. There was no EQ or anything, but I was trying to control it even then. I'd watch things on TV, and I'd think, why do they sound so good? And I started listening to records. I was sick a lot as a kid, so I was home listening to the radio. And at one point, I was really bedridden for months. I had this crazy disease in my right hip. I have a fake hip now. I have a titanium hip.
Wow.
On my right hip because of what happened when I was 11. And I was in and out of a wheelchair for a couple of years, and I had to sort of learn how to walk again. But there was a lot of listening time at that point, like, because I was literally in bed with legs that weren't working. And I just had this, like, I had one little, like some, like, 1970s version of an earbud, but only one side, listening to AM radio in mono, and, like, listening to, what was that one song Michael McDonald sang, the Doobie Brothers hit? Really phenomenal.
Minute by Minute?
Yeah, it was in that world. That was one of them. There was another one. All those great. It was that era,
Yeah.
And just started thinking, like, if I had the opportunity to, and of course I felt like I never would have the opportunity to do it, but if I did, what would I like things to sound like? And I started imagining drum sounds of the future. And I remember thinking, like, they're probably going to sound like trash cans. Like, it's going to be more metallic and just sort of noisy and sort of industrial. And this is when every snare drum sounded like a sneeze, like that Steely Dan snare drum. Sounds like everyone's sneezing. Really dry, kind of.
Super dry, yeah, exactly.
Sort of imagining the sonics of everything, and then also I was so obsessed with the actual just playing of these instruments, and I would borrow the bass guitar from the high school music room, and a lovely guy at my dad's church had a early 70s Telecaster that he'd let me use whenever I asked him, and just trying to, like, just go at a lot of stuff. And I the other thing too, and I've said this before in other interviews, but not only did I not know, I don't think I ever thought about whether I was any good or not. That didn't matter to me. I truly didn't know if I was good, and I think I assumed I was really not good, because I just had nothing to compare it to. I just knew that I wasn't on records, I wasn't on the radio or TV, and the stuff that was, when I liked it, was really amazing. So it was just a pipe dream. All of this is a pipe dream. It's really crazy to think that I'm sitting here from ABBA's studio in Stockholm, when I, like, bought my first ABBA record when I think I was around 10 or 11. And, Benny's Synclavier right there. There's a mini mug behind me right here that was taken on tour with ABBA. It's painted white because of their stage.
Sure.
Their stage set was all white, I guess, for a while. And I never knew this job existed, but I certainly thought about it a lot. I kind of created the job in my head. And then at some point when I realized, there actually there's a very narrow pie slice somewhere in the world where that can be your job, maybe, then I just leapt off the cliff at it. I threw everything at it, and I always have, and I still do.
So when you mentioned Crash Test Dummies, they're a Canadian band, aren't they, I believe?
Yes, they are. I wound up working with a lot of Canadians after I left Canada.
Okay.
But they're from Winnipeg, Manitoba.
But when did you first start doing your production, doing producing? And I assume the songwriting and the production happened kind of simultaneously, or did you start producing first and then the songwriting was a consequence of that?
It was the other way around. It was songwriting first. It was playing in a million bands and doing some touring. I was in Katie Lang's band for 3 years when I was 23 years old. I was 25. Excuse me. And she suggested that I start songwriting. And she actually had me write with her a few times. We never finished anything, but it was really inspiring just to sit with her. And she kind of imbued me with some sort of belief that, maybe I could help people write songs. I hadn't really done that before. So I got a small publishing deal from a a publishing company here in LA, not here, I'm not in LA, in Los Angeles. And I took all of it and went out and bought as much gear as I could afford. And I got a Mackie console, and I got a couple of Tascam digital 8 tracks, and got some Aphex compressors and EQs, and what else did I get? Stuff like that, I think I upgraded my Mac computer to something that was better than a Mac Plus, and just started trying to songwrite with people. And then I wanted the demos to always sound as great as I could get them, so I was just milking everything, like trying everything. And I remember thinking that, I bought a DAT player, a DAT recorder, a DAT player, and thinking that it sounded better sometimes when I recorded, I can't remember, I would print to the DAT twice, because I thought the conversion made it sound a little cooler. Like anything any little drop of sonic redemption I would take, constantly searching for it, and didn't really know what I was doing. It took me years to understand what compression was and wasn't, and I would always go for really obvious EQ things, and I was putting way too much. Like, I think I had an old oral exciter unit, and I would totally overcook that all the time on everything. Because to my ears, it's like, that sounds amazing. That sounds really clear. That sounds like what I was never hearing in my dad's church, where everything sounded like that. It's like really, over the top, and it's like, discovering spicy food for the first time, and you just kind of want to go crazy and eat all the spicy food. So, yeah, continuing to walk backwards into it.
Where do you think that the guitar is and rock music today? Now, you work on a lot of different styles of music. I was talking to some friends the other day and saying how how jazz is dead pretty much now, and but jazz started dying probably after Kind of Blue, really. If you go back, getting back to what you were saying about how it seems like everything has a similar sound to it because everyone's using the same gear, the same 10 lyrics. Does it ever break out of that? Is the guitar dead?
I agree. No, I get all of those sentiments, and I quite often feel all that too. At some point, I sort of realized there is a delineation between entertainment and art, and the stuff that we hear on pop radio is mostly just shallow end of the pool entertainment time. It's people that are trying to make money from the marketplace.
Yeah. And
then every once in a while something kind of artistic will pop through. But radio, Clear Channel, which then they changed their name to iHeartRadio. They're very conservative people. And pop radio has become, for the most part, really quite a bizarrely conservative place. However, there's a whole world out there of people making music and kids and adults listening to music that, and I'm one of them. I don't listen to pop radio. I can't. It's just it's mostly unlistenable. With a surprise every once in a while. But and when pop is great, I love it. Like anything else, when it's great, I love it. But there's some really interesting young rock bands. There's a great band called Royal Blood out of England that's like riff rock, and just the way that it comes through these kids, they're in their young 20s. It's really kind of exciting, and the audience that it's connecting with have never really heard that kind of music before. It's never going to die because it's an energy, and I got into music for the mystery of it mostly, I think. The transportive nature of how it can really take you out of whatever your situation is and put you in a very different place and alter the way you feel. So that's never going to go out of style. Major labels are going to sign things that mirror what radio is playing, and maybe vice versa too. But that is really only one channel on the TV, and especially with YouTube, you have to look a little harder for it. Radio was a lot more versatile even 10 years ago, but certainly like 20 years ago, it was really versatile. In Canada, when I go home and visit, they'll play all kinds of music on like the smaller stations. We'll go from like 1973 to right now to something from 1995. It's all over the place. in a city like Los Angeles, I don't hear that at all. It's very super
corporate
formatted and the same 8 songs all day long. I mean, I think that the major labels are having such trouble monetizing music that they're just terrified to sign something that doesn't already sound like it's making money in whatever kind of 2x4 that's floating in the ocean that is still making some money for somebody, you know? The indie labels are different, though. They'll take a chance. They also spend no money on making records. And in fact, English major label record companies don't really spend that much money on making English major label albums. But I think creatively, that's really great because they can take more of a chance on something that's really kind of interesting and unique. And the American indie labels are doing that. The majors definitely are not doing it. I don't think they can afford to.
Do you think that the fact that most major labels have been run by the same people for the past 20 years has an effect on this? What bearing does that have on the way music sounds today?
That's a big question. I'm not sure. I think in some regards, there's an upside to the fact that those people are still on board, because even though we can complain about it all day long and take pot shots at it, they are the only people left that know what they're doing. What I mean by that is labels can't afford to hire really talented, really well-paid A&R people anymore.
Right.
So labels are mostly staffed by reasonably inexperienced people who are trying really hard. I'm not knocking their effort. Everyone's working their face off. No one's phoning it in at a record company because it's just, like I said earlier, it's so hard to make any money from music today. And the way that most of those people get paid is the bonus check is not like an extra $10 at the end of the year. Sometimes it's half your salary.
Sure.
Like 50%.
Yeah.
Even the president of the labels, sometimes the bonus check is 50%. And if it's not 50%, it's sizable. It's like 30, 40%. It's quite often 50%. So, you know, everyone's working hard, but I was just thinking, like, this morning or last night, I was remembering this woman named Missy Worth, who's still very alive and well, and she works for Bacardi now, the liquor company, doing music, culture stuff for them. She grew up in the business. Her parents managed Lenny Bruce and were friends with Malcolm X, and her father became a film writer and a producer and produced movies on both of those guys and made The Rose with Bette Midler, loosely based on Janis Joplin. And, you know, Missy, as their daughter, grew up around all this stuff. She really understood how to make things tick and the ingredients you need to bring a project to life, and you got to pick the right players. And I was going through some really old emails. I was trying to find something else, but I found emails from her in 2005 asking me to please consider producing this band called OneRepublic. And I hadn't met them yet. I hadn't heard any music, and I was very busy at the time doing a bunch of stupid stuff. And my manager at the time, who again I'm sure was trying to be well-meaning, but he wasn't really prioritizing it. And she was just so cool. I just was so kind of blown away at how inviting she was. But it was very professional too. And she had a real understanding, even though she's a business person. She had a real empathy for how she felt like I could be the right ingredient with that band to make that record, which was their debut record, which had a tiny little song on it called Apologize,
right,
which changed a whole bunch of people's careers, you know. And there's not a lot of that today, you know. I mean, at the time, even Missy wasn't a teenager, you know. She'd been in the business for quite a while, and that's good. Experience is good, but those people want to be paid, and they should be, and labels aren't doing it. So, yeah, I mean, Craig Kallman's been running Atlantic for decades.
Yeah.
And I remember when he first got that gig, he was a kid, you know.
Yeah.
And he has held on to that gig, and he's no dummy. I mean, he really pays attention. He will go through a song with you and pick out the most incredible minutia. To the last time I went through that with him, I'm like, are you really like are you really on the business side of things? You know, but he very much is. But when he turns that on, a lot of those guys can do that. They really are real observers and students and fans of music. I mean, here's the real problem.
This is what I want. This is what I want, Greg. I want to know I want the answer to this.
This is where everything, pardon my French, this is where everything shit the bed. Record companies became public. They became traded on the stock market in the mid-90s. Before that happened, it was okay for a company like Warner Brothers or Atlantic or fill in the blank to make whatever their profit was. You know, they were all selling records. They were all making money. But as soon as it became a publicly traded commodity, every investor wanted to make 15% as their base return, you know, and certainly a lot more. And at that point, that's when things got kind of desperate. And it just got more that way and more that way and more that way. And then when you add Napster on top of that, then here we are. And that's why radio sounds like every ad sounds like a, you know, like a Coca-Cola commercial. And we really have to look elsewhere for something interesting. I think every decision made at a record company, almost every decision probably is based on fear. You know, I think as people, we don't make great decisions when fear is a big player in the decision making.
Yes, it's not a good. It's process, not a good.
Of course, it poisons things, and I'm saying a big thing, and I'm making massive generalizations, and you know, I'm the first one to complain about record companies, and I do it very publicly. But there are some really great people still working at them, and there will be in the future too. They're in a minority because it is the business of things. It's not music creation. It's the selling of music. You know, artists will complain about gallery owners and the whole that network of like trying to sell paintings. It makes a lot of them nauseous, you know. Yeah. But they need it, just like I need the record business. I'm not smart enough to figure out another way to monetize whatever it is I do or don't do. You know, it's just weird. Art and commerce is a bizarre meeting of two different types of liquid. I don't know. You know, it is kind of oil and water. Some of my favorite record producers they kind of make the same record again and again and again. Like it's very like they have a sound, and I love their work.
For example,
and you can probably, well, I mean, you know, I don't want to name any names, but I think you can probably figure out who some of these people are. Like really, you know, it's just kind of like they do that thing.
Sure.
And I don't have that thing, and I always thought there's something wrong with me, that I don't really have a sound as a producer, and I just thought, well, I'm just not cool enough. That's why I don't have a sound. But maybe that is my sound, that it's really not at all about me. I try to make it about the storyteller, which is the singer, whether it's an artist or the singer in a band, and then try to set the backdrop and everything, you know, the lens on the camera, the right lighting, the whatever, if we need a script rewrite, if we need a costume change, that stuff. But I want to get out of the way of it.
Do you feel that if, as long as you have a great singer, that anything else can be changed, that everything kind of emanates in popular music, emanates from whether somebody can deliver a believable performance? Adele is a blues singer, and her voice appealed to people like Chris Cornell, for example, loved Adele, and Dave Grohl, and you know, rock people and pop people and people like me love blues singers. You know, once blues started disappearing from rock music and popular music, with the exception of R&B that still remains popular, that once blues left popular music, that is in, you know, music that you hear on the radio, you don't hear a lot of blues. What do you think about that?
There's a world of young kids who are discovering versions of it, if not directly the blues, then, you know, music that's massively influenced by it, because it's been out of fashion for so long. And frankly, it got super overexposed. You know, it really, like that kind of music definitely got it. It definitely had a very good run.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
And it's not a finite thing. Everything is cyclical. People don't know what they're doing. You know, the marketplace is so fickle. Whenever anything interesting shows up, it will find an audience. And I think that, you know, music like jazz and blues and more marginalized forms of music have had a tough time putting a new face on it.
Yeah.
To bring in a younger audience, you know? I mean, I know a lot of African American musicians who will say, no matter where we play, the audience is always completely white. They're like,
Right.
my people aren't even coming out to hear a music that we invented.
When you do interviews, Greg, what do people usually ask you about?
I don't know if there's been a consistent theme. I don't know. I've done a bunch of interviews lately. I was on the cover of Mix magazine a couple months ago, and the editor of the magazine wrote this beautiful piece that was born out of, I think, 9 hours of conversation we had together. 3 different long conversations. And he wrote this beautiful piece. A lot of it, I think, was my sort of history, which we were touching on earlier in this conversation. My favorite bit was the last couple lines where I was talking about drummers and referencing people like Jim Keltner and Matt Chamberlain, 2 of my favorite drummers. Mm-hmm. And the real test of a great musician in the studio, for me, it's not whether they can play like a virtuoso or play flashy, complicated things or play slowly or whatever. To me, the thing is, can they, under the scrutiny of merciless microphones, can they make a song feel better? Then that's the benchmark to hit. I think there's a short list of people on planet Earth that can do that. Of course, it's about a million things. It's about your tone, it's about your technique, it's about your vibe and what you're bringing to it. But ultimately, we are all in servitude of the composition, and sure. The music I make always has a singer on it, so it's songs. And can you, as a musician, make the thing coming through these awful, sterile things called speakers with no visual, I think music's very visual. It's a lot of other things, too, that we don't even have a name for. It's sort of energy exchange between performer and audience and back to performer and back to the audience. But can you make it coming through just the speakers, just the sound? Can you make it feel like, wow, like whatever that feeling is, whether it's a sad feeling, whether it's a great feeling, whether it's a scary feeling, can you add to that? Can you, or is what you're doing good, but not really sticking to that feeling? Because ultimately, this is all, it's making us feel things. Alfred Hitchcock would joke with his most used composer, Bernard Herrmann. He would say, in the future, we're not going to make movies. We're just going to attach electrodes to people and make them feel different emotions. That's the real test. That's some kind of deep territory we got into in a recent interview that I really loved talking about. The real mark of like true musicianship. And it was for modern drummers who were talking about drumming in the studio, which is a big theme of my life and something I'm still really obsessed with. But it's really about like, do the drums then become just invisible, and are you? Like when you're watching a great movie, at some point, and if the movie's really great, pretty quickly, you forget that you're watching a movie.
Sure.
And you're just in it. You're just sucked in, just like fish hook, boom! And you're in the thing until it's over. And that's what a great movie does. That's what a great record can do. And I'm not sure I've ever made a great record, but this is the only thing I'm shooting for all the time, and trying to bring that out of myself as a musician, as a songwriter, as a record producer, letting the thing, that like the feeling kind of somehow come through all of this gear and not overthink it and not get in the way of it, and make me and make people feel something.
Do you like the process of mixing? Do you find that really fun?
It's not fun for me, but I love it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not fun at all, but I love it. It's I don't like puzzles, but it's like figuring out a puzzle. And then the satisfaction of the puzzle is done, and this beautiful whatever the photograph and the puzzle. It's kind of like that for me, and it again just stems from a very deep fascination with how do you make things sound great, whatever that means to me, to you, to whomever. I find it hard, and I always think it can be better, but I love being able to affect the sound. And I became a mixer for a couple of reasons, because like I finally look my age now. I'm almost 49 and I have 5 kids, so all the sleep deprivation and I've got a bunch of gray hair now and it's good. But for most of my life I didn't. I looked absurdly young and I started young. So then I looked like I was 14 and I couldn't get anyone to really listen to me in my 20s, except for Katie Lang and a couple other people. And I was always just super thin and I kind of looked like this weird sort of gawky girl. And I couldn't get a lot of older engineers to listen to me. So I started trying to learn how to do it myself. And this has all been very DIY for me. I didn't have a mentor, with recording stuff. I had musical mentors, but not with recording equipment or mixing or anything studio. So I would just try to pay attention when I was on a session. And it's just, it all tethers to wanting to make my parents' stereo sound better. I think that's the first time I've ever said that. It's really true. Like I wish that stereo sounded, like these speakers in front of me right now.
If you could do anything, if you were to do a solo record that had no vocals on it, what would it sound like?
I had a cancellation 2 or 3 years ago. That they canceled that morning, and I was already at the studio, and I thought, all right, I'm going to be productive today. And I had this idea in the back of my head, which was if I ever had a cancellation exactly like that, then I wanted to try and experiment. I didn't know how it was going to come out. I can send this to you. So the idea was one take on every instrument. Like one take on something harmonic like piano, and then build from there. But it could only be one take. Like I just, experimenting. So I did it. And it was in the month of June. I called it June Jump. And it's just me. It's one take on piano. I did it to a click track.
Okay.
So I could kind of anchor to something. And it's one take on piano. I just improvised. And then it ended. And then my studio is set up where everything's mic'd. Everything's ready to record all the time. And we can, if I'm on an album project, we're making changes and we're doing stuff. But I really insist that almost all the time it's just good to go like that. I didn't have my engineer with me. It was a songwriting session. So when it's songwriting, I don't pay my engineer to come in because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
He's just there. There's a label paying for him to be there. My assistant wasn't even there that day. So it was just me. And I hit record, ran into the drum set, put the headphones on, and played to what I had just played on piano, which was still pretty fresh in my head. And then I grabbed the bass, turned on the amp, made sure I had some, and then hit record and did that. And then I was really hungry. And then I had some lunch. And at that point, I couldn't really remember everything like I could earlier. And I played some guitar, and there's a few punch-ins on guitar. And I'm not a phenomenal guitar player anyway, but I think that one, like, there was a few like, whoops, okay, now I remember what it was. There was a bit of punch in them. But basically, certainly on the first 3 instruments, piano, drums, and bass, it is one take. And my solo record would sound like that. So I'll send it to you.
I'd love
Maybe
to hear
you can,
I'd
you're
love to
welcome
hear it.
to include it in this piece or something.
Greg, I'd like to thank you so much for being my guest today. It's really inspiring to meet you here this way, and look forward to meeting you in person.
Likewise. Likewise to all of the above. Thank you so much.
That's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel and ring the bell to let you know when a new video is coming out. Thanks for watching. I'm Rick Beato.